Hello and welcome to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. On July 8th, 2020, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 2018 Best Picture race, where we discussed Roma as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to Green Book. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really BlacKkKlansman? Hello, and welcome to On Second Thought, where we discuss another Best Picture nominee that we did not cover as the runner-up on the main show and discuss whether it may have actually been the runner-up. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we're revisiting 2018 today. And on the main show, I said that Roma was the runner-up to Green Book, but today we're discussing if it actually could have been a different film, and that film is BlacKkKlansman. And my guest today is surprisingly someone I've never had on the show before. I worked with him several years at Gold Derby, where he is a senior editor. Please welcome to the show for the first time, Daniel Montgomery.
Hello, it's a pleasure to finally be on. Yes, overdue.
Yes, indeed. And much like Spike Lee was overdue for an Oscar, finally getting his due here.
Good segue.
Right. Yes. Let's just jump right into it. So, BlacKkKlansman, it tells the story of Ron Stallworth, who is a real-life police officer from Colorado Springs. He was the first black officer of the department, and he made a series of phone calls to David Duke, the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, pretending to be white, and through that process, he sort of intercepted the local chapter of the KKK, and having his white coworker Flip Zimmerman posing as him and going undercover and eventually learning about their plots, which includes blowing up a local civil rights rally. And meanwhile, Ron is also getting involved with the leader of the Black Student Union, Patrice, and having a bit of a connection, a bit of a romance with her. So the film was directed by Spike Lee and written by Charlie Wachtel, David Rabinowitz, Kevin Wilmot, and Spike Lee. Stars John David Washington as Ron, Adam Driver as Flip, Topher Grace as David Duke, Laura Harrier as Patrice, Jasper Pakkonen, Ryan Eggold, Paul Walter Hauser, Ashley Atkinson, Corey Hawkins, Alec Baldwin, and Harry Belafonte. And BlacKkKlansman was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 1, but that one was not Best Picture. So, Daniel, very interested to hear your thoughts on how you felt about BlacKkKlansman as it was coming out and shaping up in the Oscar race, and now how you feel about it. What is this, 4 or 5 years later? What are our thoughts here?
I remember liking it very much. It wasn't like my top favorite of the year, but it was certainly one that I was happy to see in the Oscar conversation. Certainly one that was very directly talking to events that were happening at the time. And watching it again just a few years later, it was almost a little unsettling how much it seemed to still be talking to even more things that are happening in current society. So yeah, I was very impressed with it. I was very impressed with how much Spike Lee addresses, it's not always at the foreground of discussion, but it's there. He's acknowledging so many facets of this kind of right-wing, white supremacist, authoritarian, movement that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I was a huge fan of BlacKkKlansman when it came out, and not to foretell my thoughts too much on the Oscar discussion, but I think it was easily one of the saving graces of the 2018 Best Picture lineup, which I found to be, on the whole, a little underwhelming. But this was one of the bright spots. And I think just looking at the craft, setting aside just the relevance of the story itself and the themes, I think it's just pretty impeccably crafted. It's very well paced, and not only as a film, but just like within individual scenes, the tension, you feel the momentum rising, and things are gonna obviously turn out all right in the end for Ron because he wrote this book decades later after the fact. But it's still, you feel the tension rising and rising throughout the film. And I think the score by Terence Blanchard really gives it kind of a grandeur that might be missing without it, perhaps.
Yeah, that is a great score.
Yeah, that really good repeated electric guitar theme, I think, is very memorable. And I think the cinematography is actually something that was underrated at the time, and something that I forgot about in before this rewatch, just how striking the film looks. I think it's just photographed very elegantly, So I think, even if some people might disagree with the effectiveness of the story and just the decision to focus on sympathizing with police officers to a certain extent, you can at least appreciate the technical work. And it for me, it proves that you can sort of create this sense of largeness and importance even with a very small budget.
That the whole the police focus of it, I feel like that's probably the least convincing part, where you see how much support he has from some key members of the department, while still having pushback with specifically one member of the department who's really focused, the focus of like, this is what racist policing is in the film, and everyone else is super supportive. I felt that was a little bit, probably not how things went.
Probably not, but yeah, it does feel like that one guy is sort of like the scapegoat of like, here's the guy you're supposed to hate. And everyone else is like, yeah, I would agree with that. But I think what really spoke to me and still speaks to me about the film is, I think it shows how like the difficulty of navigating this society, white society, as a minority. There's some part of you that's is always a little bit on guard, and how there are different ways of fighting back against prejudice and racism or anti-Semitism, homophobia, even though that's not really an issue in this film in particular, but I think is a little bit under the same umbrella, where some people choose to be open about it and just proud and joining certain organizations to fight back against, the powers that be. And then others choose to sort of work within the system and try to undo the underlying problems happening in these institutions, and sort of suggesting that neither side is wrong necessarily. And it sort of goes back to that juxtaposition of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, just, both of them fighting for civil rights. They're just going about it in different ways, but that ultimately they're on the same side. So, I mean, not to get, again, too far ahead of ourselves, but that's what's powerful about the final, the dolly shot of Ron and Patrice, like, side by side at the end.
Yeah,
like,
that is a gorgeous shot. That's one of my favorite shots of the whole film.
It really is, yeah. It's just like, these two who've been a little bit on opposing sides of the debate for a large part of the movie, especially when she finds out that he's a cop. But in the end, they have the real enemy out there that they can only really try to overcome together in a way.
Yeah, and you mentioned how it doesn't really touch very much on sexual minorities, the LGBTQ community, but there is a scene, I think, at the shooting range where they're talking about all the people they hate, and it's definitely on. Yeah. You could definitely see it's on their list. Certainly with the Jewish people and Black people.
Yeah, that is true. It's all under that umbrella. And I think in terms of the message, I think he's able to sort of blend it where it doesn't feel overly proud of itself and sort of smug in what it's trying to do, like some directors are wont to do, such as Adam McKay from this very lineup. But it's like it's not too pleased with itself in the message that it's trying to convey. And at the same time, he's able to give you that message, but still give you the entertainment value of the story and how unbelievable it is that this happened. But also, showing that this is an ongoing issue still. So that's one of my main takeaways, is that there's such a delicate balance here of these different tones, but really mastering exactly what the story needs to be to reach the right sort of mainstream audience.
Yeah, and I appreciated a lot how direct the movie is. The movie
Yeah.
is not like hiding behind, allegory or very much. It says America first when it wants to address that aspect of what was happening at the time with, Donald Trump in the White House. The two characters have a conversation. It's like no one would ever elect someone like David Duke as president of the United States. That's ridiculous. I appreciate that it's not shy about, this is what the story is about, but this is what I actually also want to talk about. It's all connected. You could sort of draw a straight line from one to the other.
Right. And I did see just some criticism of just how blunt it is and how direct it is as a film. But I sort of am just like, the message doesn't need to be obscured. The way that he approaches it is probably the right way to just bluntly lay it out the way that it is. So I don't take issue with the bluntness of it, even though there are those references, like you're saying, like, they'll never elect a guy like this president of the United States, where I was just like, oh boy, okay. Like a little bit like, trying to please a crowd a little bit by making them be like, oh yes, I recognize, the reference here. But it still works for me at the end of the day. Another interesting element, I think, that I want to get your opinion on is just the sort of homages to filmmaking of the past, which I think is also a fascinating through line from the start of showing Gone with the Wind and the Confederate flag there, the references to Birth of a Nation, obviously. What do you think of that sort of inclusion in the film?
I think it's very useful and purposeful, and I really like that he does it. It's one of the aspects that makes me almost a little bit surprised that the Academy went for it, because he's not letting Hollywood off the hook, or trying to make Hollywood feel good about itself, because a lot of racial prejudice and racial stereotype comes from popular media. And Birth of a Nation did rebirth the KKK in the United States, and Gone with the Wind was a very loving tribute to the Confederacy.
That also won Best Picture.
That also won Best Picture from
Yes.
the Academy. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
Spike Lee is very much telling the same people who are voting for this movie, it's kind of look inward. This is not, you can't just look at David Duke and feel good that you're not that kind of racist. You also have to look at the history that you represent as an industry, and how it contributed to a lot of those same things.
Right. And it's, this is a medium that for a long time has primarily served to entertain a mostly white audience, and that the power of film, I think, is just creating these images that stick in your mind, and that can also inspire certain ideas and ideologies. The scene with Harry Belafonte talking about Birth of a Nation and just how it revive the KKK in a sense, just glorifying them is a very big example of that. And Gone with the Wind, this romanticized view of the South, it's, I don't know, I think on some level Spike is sort of holding this entire industry accountable for perpetuating this idea, and then also showing at the end the footage of the Charlottesville rally and the murder of Heather Heyer, and just showing like this very sobering truth of what's really going on and just sort of the consequences of some of that. It's just this really interesting element where we're seeing like the past and the present, sort of reflecting the past and the future of what's actually happening in this story, even if it's not directly connected to the story of BlacKkKlansman. It still sort of is informing that and showing that it's sort of a timeline, that this isn't just like a beginning, middle, and end story, and this is, this nice, neat ending that we can all feel good about walking out of the film. We have to just like be vigilant about, this is a timeline. It's not like a focused thing, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is a movie that has a tough job, because it's a very angry film in a way that a Spike Lee film often is, in a very good way, I think. It's connecting all of these dots between culture and politics and institutions like the police, and how it has all contributed to where we are now. And it's a movie that sort of has a happy ending, but also very much doesn't, because it by ending with that Charlottesville footage, it's showing that this story is very much ongoing. We have not reached the promised land. We have not reached the end of all of this. It's still ongoing, and it's still ongoing, even after we of course elected Joe Biden. We don't know if we've seen the last of Donald Trump. So it's still incredibly sobering even now.
Yeah. And I think also within the film itself, it's not necessarily a happy ending. And by the film itself, I mean the narrative of Ron Stallworth, because the whole investigation is just wiped away. And, he wasn't even able to talk about it until decades later. And then he's still having to confront the Ku Klux Klan, who are still out there doing their thing. And, it's not like this nice little story where he can feel good about what he did and that's it. It's like, it's not great for him either, the ending. As much as you can be excited and rally behind these guys who pulled this off, it's like the reality then sinks in. And who knows, maybe that might have affected how certain industry voters felt about the film in the end, that they didn't like that it sort of pulled the rug out from under them in the end.
Well, I think the film does try to give certain audience members a win. They're like two main scenes towards the end where you have the racist cop gets his comeuppance, which is probably the most fairy tale fantastical scene in the entire movie. Because even if a character like that gets his comeuppance, I don't see like all the white officers rallying around the black officer for this one sting operation to get the guy off the force. Like, I don't see that happening at all. And then there's that final call with David Duke. And watching it again this time, it feels like that's an incredibly satisfying scene, but it's also, you can tell how sort of hollow the victory is. Yeah, you're telling him off on the phone, but the investigation is gone. And in the end, you still see Patrice and Ron, in that last shot, as we mentioned before, and they're witnessing this burning cross that's still there, that hasn't gone away. So I think it does try to give a win while also acknowledging that, this was a battle and the war is not over.
Exactly. Right. I do also want to speak to just the performances here. What are our thoughts on John David Washington here?
I think John David Washington, like, this was very much his star-making moment. When you're the son of Denzel Washington, that's a lot to live up to, especially when you're the son of Denzel Washington in a Spike Lee film.
Right.
So that directly invites comparisons. He came very close to a Best Actor nomination for this. Got the SAG and got the Golden Globe nominations for it. But it's not like that kind of heavy lifting, emotional kind of performance. It very much feels like a star performance from him, as we're starting to see his star rise and have been since then. Incredibly charismatic. He's magnetic. You just kind of, drawn to him on screen. And I think that has helped him in his career since. I think his time will come with the Academy, certainly.
Yeah. Personally still think that this is probably his best performance, at least the most effective to me. And part of me is still surprised that he didn't get that nomination, because in a film like this, that's easily a top 5 film. It's wild that it didn't happen, but maybe it is the fact that it's not a character that is having a lot of emotional outbursts, I suppose you could say. There's not a whole lot of speechifying, perhaps. It's very much this sort of central, a little bit stoic kind of performance. But yeah, he has this very interesting sort of charisma that is no doubt just sort of something that's genetic from Denzel.
One thing that I think that he does really well, that probably doesn't get as much appreciation, is the way he shows that code switching, the way he turns on
Yes,
the white voice, quote unquote, and
the white voice,
the white. Uh,
the extra H. Yes.
are you sure about that? Um, and the way he's able to switch from one to the other really does a lot of the work in showing how he has to sort of live between the two worlds.
Right. Yeah, and it's not just the voice, it's just, him really having to walk this tightrope within the police force and sort of retaining his values and what he believes in and saying what he knows is true, like in the beginning after he goes to the civil rights rally for the discussion with Kwame, and saying that it wasn't necessarily like inciting violence so much as just like warning this community to be vigilant. And it's like he's trying to protect the community and sort of diffuse the situation, but still try to please his bosses. It is this very delicate tightrope that I think he walks decently well. So, yeah, love really, really good performance from him. Obviously, Adam Driver is the only person nominated as an actor from this film. Another interesting tightrope act here, too, I think, of not only having to pretend to be Ron Stallworth, but also the fact that he's Jewish and is having to use this sort of anti-Semitic language when he's with the Klansmen. So there, I think there's these layers too, with Driver really having to play that is. It's not necessarily again a flashy performance with a lot of huge, screaming by any means, but he's able to really shapeshift, I think, really well, that you can believe him to be like this guy who has these values. Unfortunately, it's a little too believable that like the a guy who looks like Adam Driver and sort of acts like him and speaks like him, like and wears the flannel, like it's all very much packaged in a way that is surprisingly believable.
Yeah, and it's a testament to how much the film was liked that these two fairly stoic performances did get as much traction as they did, with Adam Driver getting in to that nomination,
Mm-hmm.
also coinciding with, I think Adam Driver was sort of on the rise to a certain level where the Academy was just
Right.
waiting for the opportunity, and they got one here. Their first of what has turned out to be a couple, and will probably turn out to be more over the years.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Um, and but there's this one scene that really strikes me in particular of him, is where he's processing it for the first time, where he talks about how he grew up Jewish, but he never really that was never really a strong part of his identity, and now he's denying it, having to deny it, and thus thinking about it all the time. And it's the way he's like pondering this KKK membership that they've gotten together, and it's a subtle scene, but it's an incredibly powerful scene from Adam Driver. I think that scene really helped clinch it for him.
Thank you for listening to this preview of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.